On that note, we've got a very special guest speaker here today, Dr Geoff Wilson. Come on up. We'll have a quick chat. We go back a little bit of a way. I've been working with you more recently, Geoff, with Julio Delafitte and Unstoppables, reconnected after a long, long time. But Geoff and I met way back, how long ago, Baz? 1998, when he saved my beautiful brother's baby dog, Bronxy, a Rottweiler, from parvovirus, and that took Baz on a big journey. Baz drove up from Holsworthy Army Base with Bronxy sick in the back of his car, not knowing whether he'd make it, and it was really touch and go. It didn't look like he was going to make it.
No, we just had a confessional this morning. I actually confessed to...
Clone Bronx.
No. This dog was very ill, and Baz snuck out without paying his bill. And, so the next day, I snuck out, climbed over Baz's fence and stole the dog back. And bearing in mind I'd only been a vet for a very short time and didn't realise that was highly illegal. But I sweated blood to save this dog. I'd be darned if Baz is going to get away without paying his bill, even though he's a lot bigger than me. Anyway, I left my business card in his door, and then I rang the lawyer on the way back to the clinic, and he's going, "You did what? You've broken about 8 laws. Get that dog back straight away." So we gave the dog a little bit more fluid and then drove back to the clinic. And I could hear Baz was upset on the inside of the door, so I knock on the door, Baz comes out, and I go, "Oh crap, I'm going to get bashed." Anyway, I hand in Bronx back and go, "We've just done your first complimentary parvo check. I'll see you in the morning." So to Baz's credit, he turned up with a carton of Corona and $700 the next morning, and we've been mates ever since.
Barry Dan, oh my gosh. That is hysterical.
I only just confessed that I stole the dog. He thought it was a complimentary check for 20 years. 20 years, he won't be referring anyone else to me now.
Oh no, you certainly did the job, and Bronxy lived a long, happy, healthy life. So yeah, so that's just a little bit of an anecdote. But it's lovely to have reconnected, and you're doing some incredible things. So it's over to you to hear more about what you're up to.
Thanks so much. Just make sure I've got my notes here. Great, so it's an honour to be here, guys, and I know a lot of you have heard my story or know of me, but there's always something new in the pipeline, so I hope we can stimulate you today. And what I'm talking about really is just an attitude in business that is the same attitude I use on every expedition, and I call it the all-in attitude or the all-in process. We're going to go right back to 1519 to think of a guy called Hernando Cortez, who we all know from history was the guy that subdued the Aztec kingdom. And if you're an Aztec at the time, it's probably not a great day in history. But from our point of view, it illustrates the all-in principle so well. Every army that had gone into that jungle in South America to subdue this kingdom had been defeated, had been wiped out, had either been killed by disease or the Indians had killed them themselves. Cortez knew this, so before he went into the jungle, they're amassed on the beach, his army's ready and waiting to go in, and some of them already had thoughts of home on their mind. They didn't want to be there, it was hot, horrible, dank, they didn't know what was in there, they knew it was going to be tough from history. His last command before he went in was to burn the boats. We know that saying, burn the boats behind you. Now it is just the saying, but my message today really relates to using this in business, to use this in your private life, to use this in your adventure life. By burning the boats, he removed any exit strategy. There was no way that his army could do anything but succeed. And history goes on to tell us that's exactly what happened. But before we go on to that little bit of an intro to me, I'm a man of 3 parts. I'm an adventurer, my passion is adventure, and the attitude that I go into adventure is the same thing I use as a businessman. So I'm also a businessman and also a family man. Now the unique thing with me is that I know many adventurers who are living on the bones of their arse because they've spent so long in the wilderness that they've neglected family and they've neglected their business. I know many business people who've lost all perspective and lost their family, lost their love for adventure, and hence pop out the other end at 45 with no direction and no purpose. So for me today, I'm here to remind you that we are all three parts, and you neglect one to your peril. 10 days ago, I buried one of my best friends. He committed suicide because he got these three parts out of whack. He was an incredible businessman, an incredible family man, but the adventure in his life had gone. So what I'm here today to remind you of, let's focus on all these three areas. I hope by the end of this breakfast, if you have neglected one of these areas, you will go home and rectify it. You'll change your attitude from today. Today will be a watershed moment for you, that you would understand that we are multiple parts. And just to focus on one area leads us to peril. So there's a couple of achievements along the way in the adventure realm, and they're no less important to me than the fact that I have a happy wife and 3 happy kids and family. So they're all those parts. There's some beautiful men here today who we've just sold 4 of our businesses. We've built over 14 businesses over a 20-year period. The sale is just under a $6 million sale. So I can tell you, from a business point of view, I can talk to you about business, I can talk to you about adventure, I can talk to you about family. So I hope you see the 3 parts there. The Sahara journey was the longest land journey by kite in history. We very nearly had the record broken by a mate in Mongolia this year, but they ran out of wind, so we still hold that record. Simon and I crossed from Australia to Papua New Guinea, the first team there to do so. The previous team had disappeared into the Coral Sea, never to be seen again. So it was a nervous crossing, but this is our arrival in Daru. It was one of the most amazing things in my life, to hear the roar of over 1,000 villagers on the beaches, having never seen kites before, to see us come out of the ocean to the south of them. This is the one probably I'm most known for. Last year I finished the fastest crossing of the Antarctic continent from the coast through the South Pole to the other side of the country. The record has stood for 17 years, held by a fantastic guy called Borjusland, who we'll meet later on in the presentation. He'd held that record justifiably. He was one of the toughest men on earth in the polar regions. And for an Aussie from the Gold Coast, born on sand, to come there and challenge the record was ridiculous enough. The reason the record fell was because of this all-in approach. We're going to go to a map of Antarctica just to give you an idea of the size. You can see Australia fits in quite neatly 2 times into Antarctica. We don't get an appreciation of the size of Antarctica because it's stuck on the bottom of the globe when we look at it. It's an enormous place. The journey that I just completed was up from the edge of the continent here on a Russian base, 200 kilometres through horrendous broken ice, onto the top of the plateau, 9,000 feet above, then nearly the distance of a Trans-Australia crossing to the pole, and then unfortunately I could not get permission to get into this sector here, what I call the forbidden zone of Antarctica. No man has been in here with permission solo before. So I then had to do a right-hand turn and come to the coast. It still broke the record, but for me, in my mind, this is the journey that I wanted to do. It was the journey that I committed to, and it's the journey that we've just received permission for me to do October next year. The exciting thing about this journey is it will be the longest journey by a human being in a polar region ever in history. It's arguably our most significant polar adventure since Mawson in 1915. And the opportunity has only come to me through having this all-in approach to everything that I do. So being all in, what does it mean to you today? It doesn't mean that you're a fanatic. It doesn't mean that you're difficult to get along with. It doesn't mean that you're pushy. It just means that when you speak something into being, when it comes out of your mouth, people know that it's going to happen. There's an integrity with that in business. When people know that you've committed to something, from your history, they know that it's going to happen. And what you'll find is people will start to get onto your ideas because you don't have to speak things lightly. When something has come out of your mouth, they know that you've thought long and hard about it before it's come out. So what we're finding is when I say that I'm going to complete the longest journey by a human being ever in a polar region, we're finding people understand that from my history, it's going to happen. So it's been much easier to get support for it. It's 5 times the budget of any adventure we've ever taken on. It's a huge undertaking. To get me out of that forbidden sector could be as much as $1 million just to get me home. So it's a huge undertaking. It's taken this attitude the whole way through to get us to a point where it can happen. I'm getting my salient points here. Okay, I'm going to set the stage for a video coming up, and some of you will have seen this, so I probably won't play the whole video, but I want you to get just a very small glimpse of what it feels like to be solo in an Antarctic storm. Remembering that my experience at this point in the polar regions was 4 days. I'd not ever seen a storm like this before. Sarah and I sailed with the family in front of Cyclone Pierre in 2007, did $40,000 damage to a boat. Thought that was the most terrifying storm I'd seen. In 2009, I saw a cameraman inside a tent blown across the Sahara Desert with his cameras whacking him in the head and screaming like a baby girl. I thought that was the worst storm I'd ever seen. Last year, this storm hit the coast of Antarctica, arguably the biggest, most ferocious storm to hit Antarctica in 50 summers. Prince Harry was waiting in Cape Town, lucky he was there. I was stuck in the middle of it. The only reason I survived that storm was because of the preparation and the all-in approach. It was a horrendous 4 days. At the end of the storm, I was punching the ground in absolute rage, willing this storm to finish, praying that the elements would give me a break. Within 12 hours, the storm was over. We're going to go to the video now, remembering the air temperature is minus 35, so even 5 knots feels like you're getting punched in the face. At 40 knots, which is when this is filmed, you're having difficulty standing up. At 80 knots, which is what the storm topped out at, I started to be really fearful for my life. I got on the phone to Maddie McNair up in the north, in Eskimo country. She was the lady that trained me to survive in this environment. Rang her and said, listen, what do I do? How do I ensure that I survive this storm? She went through the list of things I'd done and said, Geoff, you've done all you can. If the tent fails now, you can count your life in hours. I said, I don't understand. Surely there's some way that I can dig myself into the snow. There must be a way I can survive this without the tent. She said, no, the spin drift at that wind speed will get forced into your down suit. Your body temperature will melt the spin drift or the fine snow. It's going to enter you down, and over a 4-hour period you'll start to lose body heat and then into a hypothermic state. So at that point I realised that I had to work my guts out. So every hour I was out digging the tent out very carefully, stopping the snow, burying myself. And anyway, the storm eventually abated and I survived the storm. For those of you who don't know, the reason there's a bright pink set of boobs upwind of the tent was that I was hauling a boob sled that we'd made from my darling wife's cleavage to carry all my supplies. While I was in that tent punching the ground, willing myself to survive the storm, 3 kilometres away was a Frenchman who's now a good friend, Faisal Hanet. He was stuck in the same storm, getting hit by the same conditions. He'd been through 4 days of sheer hell, like me. The difference was he had better gear. He had way more pedigree. He'd been to the North Pole, trained with the Norwegians for 11 years. As opposed to my 4 days in this environment, he had a bank of experience. But he ended up finishing the storm in a way worse state than me. The reason being that, one, I had a purpose of being there. I'd met all these women who'd been through hell worse than I'd been through. So I was aligned with a purpose. So today, if your business is not aligned with a purpose, I'd encourage you to do so. Find something you're passionate about. Come to me, I've got so many causes in my head, I'll find you something if you don't have something. I need to align businesses with causes. When you hit a storm like this in your business, if you're aligned with a cause, as soon as you get to your feet, you'll get moving. At the end of that storm, as soon as the wind started to abate, I started to move. The remainder of that day and the next day, I covered over 58 kilometres, gained nearly 4,000 feet in elevation. At the same time, Faisal was still licking his wounds in his tent. He didn't cover a metre. The next day, I covered another 20 kilometres. It was nearly 2/3 of the way up the climb. Faisal moved 3 kilometres, and then another storm hit us. The fact that I was 70 kilometres away from him meant that that storm didn't hit me with the same ferocity that he was getting hit. He was right back to where we were at the beginning of the storm. The difference was that I had approached the whole thing with this all-in approach, and I was aligned with a purpose. Faisal was there to be the third man across Antarctica. It wasn't enough to get him through the storm. We've lost our screen there. Awesome. While I was in that storm, I thought back to this guy. Now this little guy is the little guy that taught me the importance, the second part of the all-in process, is to make sure that you're still dreaming and visioning within your business. The reason I thought of this little guy was in 2009, at the end of a very, very tough 42-day journey across the Sahara Desert. We'd had 9 out of 13 men involved in the expedition have emotional and physical breakdowns. The heat was up to 55 degrees. We had 700 kilometres of mined territory that just played with men's minds to the point where they were breaking. It was all I could do to get the team to the Senegal River. Not far from the Senegal River was a village, and it was the most disgusting poverty I'd ever seen in my life. There were dead animals within feet of this guy, human excrement all over the beach, and yet there he was on the bow of a broken boat, singing with an imaginary piece of pipe with a string coming out of it with a guitar. And in his mind, he was the captain of a big ship offshore, hauling in fish. You could see in his mind that he was away in a wonderful place. I watched him for a full 2 minutes and he didn't even know I was there. He was just dreaming of this incredible place. And he taught me that ability that the human mind has to create magic when you're in a tough situation through dreaming and visioning. In the Western world, we've forgotten the importance of dreaming and visioning. So I'd encourage you today, if you're not dreaming and visioning, then you've already got one foot in the grave. I want you to get that foot out of the grave and start dreaming and visioning. And Baz, for the toughness you've been through and what you put on the line for Australia, I commend you. And today I'm here to remind you, we need to get you a dream and a vision to get that foot out of the grave. I'm not putting any more Australian men in the ground early. And from now on, with Andy dying just 2 weeks ago, I made a commitment to Sarah that the rest of my life I'll dedicate to making sure we do not put Australians in the ground early. It's just happening too regularly. We have a spike in the early 20s, we have a spike in the early 40s, and a new spike in the 80s. Because we're not talking as men, it's important we get ourselves out into the wilderness and create bonds that last a lifetime. So what Simon and I are doing with Fifth Element Expeditions is making a platform where we can get men and women into adventure and avoid this happening. Getting businesses aligned with purpose so that we don't lose drive. This guy saved me in the storm, and I thought of him often. The reason it's so important to dream is you can dream your way back to a better outlook or a position. No matter what tough period you're going through, no matter what storm you're going through, you can dream and vision yourself into a better position. It gives you an escape release, a pressure release on the cooker. You might feel your head's about to explode, but that dreaming and visioning is letting that pressure off. Gets traction again when your feet are spinning in the mud, your wheels aren't gripping. Getting that traction. It's about starting small, seeing the result of the dream, and then your faith gets built. I didn't do Antarctica as the first journey. My first journey was a cycling trip across the Sahara Desert, and that really doesn't back up my start small notion. But in your life, if you're not used to dreaming and visioning, start small. Dream and vision. When you see it come to pass, then you go, wow, okay, that worked. I'm going to dream and vision up another plan. So the second step of that process, so important. The other thing that I love to talk about is what I call the faith eye. And this is connected to the dreaming and visioning step. This is a period where I have been incredibly disciplined about thoughts of home. For the first 3,000 kilometres of the journey, I refused to let myself think of family or home, chocolate, food, hamburgers, roast beef, all of that stuff. I was allowing my mind to go to between 7 p.m. at night and 8 p.m. only. Beyond that, thoughts of family, thoughts of home were put away for 24 hours, right through till the next night. And I was disciplined like a rigid steel trap on that in my mind. I would curse myself if I thought of it outside those times. For the last third of the journey, I opened the gates. And for hour after hour after hour, in my what I call faith eye, I would see images of my wife, see images of my boy, and just ponder on his face as the kite pulled me across the ice for interminable hour after hour of broken ice, slamming my body with pressure, but just focusing my faith eye on the images of home. It had an incredible ability to focus me on getting there. So whatever your dream is, you need to create that picture in your mind that is so elaborate. It's exactly where you want to be. So if you're struggling right now, let's start building the dreaming and visioning. Let's start building the faith eye image. My image of what it would look like to stand on the southern end of the Sahara Desert, on the last sand dune, with 4 men having crossed from one side to the other, 2,500 kilometres using kites only, was so elaborate that when I actually got there, you could have laid the 2 images over in my mind, like a carbon copy. It was freakish how similar the 2 images were. So you cannot get to the end of the journey if you do not know where you're going. And the faith eye is about building that image. Step 3, for me, super important step of the process. If you look at your gifts, lay them down on a piece of paper, and if that's not something you do regularly, I encourage you to do it. We've all been built in an incredible way. We've all got incredible skill sets. Even those of us who are less confident, less outlandish, know that somewhere in us there's some gifts. If you haven't located them, written them down, it's an exercise you need to do, and I'd encourage you to do that this week. Write down those gifts. If you lay your dream over the top and your gifts don't line up with your dream, then we've got a problem. If I want to sing at the Tamworth Country and Music Festival, and yet I can't even play a guitar, there's a problem. So knowing what your gifts are will avoid you getting into that horrible place where you've been bashing at a dream for years and wondering why it's not happening. Your gifts are not lining up with your dream. So let's go back to your gifts, line them up. I'm not saying that if there are weaknesses, you can't get over them. I had never been in -35 before. I had never been solo for more than 12 days. The last time I was solo, I started to go mad. So I knew I had weaknesses there. So at this point, I started to create uplinks. The uplinks are so important. If you look at that gift list, you look at your dream, it vaguely matches, but you've got weaknesses. The uplinks are where the weaknesses can get corrected. With the internet now, it's so easy to find the best person in the world at whatever it is you're weak at. I contacted this man, Borges Land, arguably the toughest polar explorer on the planet. Holds more polar records than any human alive currently. Rang him and said, "My name's Geoff Wilson. You don't know me. I know you. I want to beat your record." I could hear him chuckling at the end of the phone, and I don't think he was that stressed. This fella from the beaches was going to give his record a nudge. And I said, "Listen, can you direct my training? Can you train me personally?" He agreed to train me personally, and as it happened, his timing, he was in Washington while I was meant to be up in Norway with him. So he referred me on to the next best person on the planet, Maddie McNair, who's this pint-sized lady with a 50-kilo heart. who lives right up with the Eskimos in the north of Canada, and she just put me through my paces. The best uplink I could ever had, especially considering the expedition was all about women's health. The next uplink was Lydia Brady, the first woman to summit Everest without oxygen. I contacted her and said, I know nothing about crevasse fields. You've crossed the Khumbu Icefall 16 times, the most dangerous ice field in the world leading up to Everest. She took me on, trained me, got me under the wing. So my weaknesses were slowly getting worked on through these uplinks. So find your gifts, get an uplink. Make sure I've not missed anything here. Okay, this one you're not going to like, unfortunately. Train until you bleed. Often we have the all-in approach to the whole process. We have dreaming and visioning. We've located our gifts. We've got some uplinks. But we want the travel aider to get us through this stage. The stage that hurts. The stage that's the grunt phase. And athletes amongst us, we know this stage. You guys know this stage. It's the stage where it's boring. It's just plain hard work. This photo was taken right up in the north near the Eskimos. I've been up there for 3 weeks. It was my first solo run. Matty McNair had said to me, Geoff, I have no problem with your skill sets. I have no problem with your endurance, but I worry about you as a people person being out in the Great White. I'm concerned you could start to go mad. So she pinpointed one of my weaknesses was the fact that I couldn't stand being alone for that period. So I'd had this 3-day period of being alone and was just starting to realise that to survive here I had to love the environment. It was uncomfortable, everything hurt, sleeping was a mess because you get this shroud of ice over your face. Every time you moved you get ice crystals fall on you. It was uncomfortable. And I was thinking to myself, how am I going to learn to love this environment? It's hideous. It really is hideous. Then I started to pull the sled. There'd been no wind, so it was all man hauling, and I started to cough up blood. Blood coming out of my mouth and nose onto the snow, and even a small drop of blood on snow has this alarming effect on the human mind, human body. You start to panic. It's what they call Khumbu cough, which is just an overdrawing of the alveoli, and the alveoli crack and bleed. Now, it can progress into something serious, but I remember looking at that blood and going to myself, now you're getting somewhere. Now the training is at this stage that I need it to be for it to be effective so I can survive this environment. So when you bleed, you know that you're pushing hard enough. And whether it's business, there are periods where you will bleed in a figurative sense, where it'll feel painful. That's the edge that you're going to need to get to really make a difference.